talk about a sense of call. Scott Anderson, when he retired from 21 years in the Army, he saw an ad with the United Nations Refugee and Works Agency, a post that was a position in the West Bank. And he thought, well, that looks interesting and challenging, and indeed it was. There's at least 780,000 Palestinian refugees in the West Bank at the time, and the United Nations runs 100 schools with 50,000 kids in the schools, and they see over 1 million patients in their facilities. And then there's all these enrichment programs. Remember, we talked about this a month ago or so in the Gaza Strip, how the United Nations has this summer program with 250,000 kids, and we talked about how the kids like set the world record for flying the most kites, 13,000 at a time, and dribbling the most soccer balls. And so for a decade, Scott Anderson spent time kind of running these refugee programs from the West Bank to the Gaza Strip and back. And then, you know, farm boy, came back to the States for a few years, and then in November, his words, he had a call to go back to Gaza and to direct the whole refugee relief program right now. Some of you may have seen him on PBS. He's been interviewed several times. He's kind of 55, 60-year-old white guy, kind of, well, it's hard to tell with the grainy internet connection, but kind of short white hair. And listening to him, I mean, you can't help but hear the enormity of the challenge. I mean, we know it, right? 90% of the population displaced, and almost every single structure destroyed, and the challenges of trying to get relief aid in there. And then the situation like in Rafah that had 280,000 people struggling before the war, now has 1.4 million people. And listening to him just say, in a really sad situation, and we're going to lose an entire year of education for the children. But you can't miss in his words the sense of call, that in spite of the 146 colleagues he's had killed there, he wouldn't be anywhere else. And looking at him, you see this human being who is living at the very edge of everything they're capable of, right? Absolutely pushed physically and socially and spiritually to the very limit of their call. In truth, you don't have to go across the ocean to find people who are committed and who are called. I hear it every single day talking to you all. I hear it as you talk about being a parent, being a grandparent, being a parent especially when a kid is struggling with something serious, being a friend, being in healthcare, from being the surgeon to the person who gets the people scheduled, from being a volunteer, being a scout leader. And I hear it in real estate agents, and I hear it in the people who start a restaurant to create community. And of course I hear it in our teachers. I mean, in the 40 years I've done this, that's probably the profession in which the language of call just comes naturally. Same this week. Sat down with Ann Klockow for her birthday. She came in. Most of her career has been more speech and language pathologist, but last year Jody Garbison asked her to consider teaching English as a second language to adult learners. And she came in and sat down at lunch after teaching, you know, folks from all these different countries trying to speak language, and she said, this is just so hard. This is really, really hard. I mean, trying to imagine all these people from different cultures trying to teach them English, and even with a good mentor like Jody, still hard. But she said, I'm gonna get this, I'm committed to it. She said, you know, this is what I feel called to do right now, right? That sense of call. And earlier in the week, sat down and had coffee with Ben Carmen Brown for his birthday. Ben and Shelley met in Teach for America for the last dozen years or so. Ben has been not just a teacher, but then a principal at Kaufman Academy, and now director of schools, where Shelley is middle school principal. And listening to him, this child of two pastors, you know, understanding that sense of call in his own life, you know, like a zip code shouldn't hold a kid back, right? That you got to find their greatness and pull out their greatness. And you can't miss that sense of call. I hear it, honest to God, from people all the time. And I also hear now and then folks struggling with the sense of call, right? Life kind of throws you a challenge. You find yourself kind of back on your heels, trying to figure out what's next. I certainly had a situation like that one time. Lost a church, and even though I started another church the next day, it took me 2 or 3 years really of trying to think, is this really what I should be doing? And Brandon and other people pointed out how patient people were, because my sermons were about 6 minutes long, right? Because for a long, just trying to figure it out. But I see that, right? When a job ends suddenly, or when there is a change in a relationship, when people retire, there's often a couple of years trying to figure out, who am I? What am I going to do? What's going to be my next role? And part of that, again, is noticing what are my gifts and naming it. I'm a grandparent. This is what I'm called to do right now, and nurturing it. But it's not just the kind of life changes that come our way that sometimes throw us into a sense of what's my calling. The modern world cuts us off from ourselves. Last week we talked about how the modern world cuts us off from one another. In case you haven't noticed, 75% of Gen Z say they're always or sometimes lonely. But the modern world cuts us off from ourselves too, from our deepest core and from our Creator. And you think about just the war as an example. Sarah Aziza, who writes for the Jewish Currents, wrote a wonderful essay called The Work of Witness, and she had this line in there that has just haunted me. 3 months into a live stream genocide, and what has all this looking done, right? She's talking about how initially at the start, of course, the journalists rushed in, so many who have been killed, 83 or more, believing if the world just saw, right? A hospital being bombed. Who could imagine? And now, all the hospitals have been bombed, and the universities, and the mosques, and the homes, and even the citizen journalists, like that young woman, Bassan, rushing in there believing if people just saw. And people are seeing, right? But it's the world of scrolling. Folks, we're scrolling through, this is what someone had for dinner, and look at this cute thing a dog did, and look at this mother holding her child that's dead. That's not helpful for the human brain. And for young people, it dysregulates us, and it's numbing, and it's hopeless, and it makes you feel like, can you really make any difference? And I am going to go to my grave believing that some of the challenges of the mental health crisis, especially among affluent kids, are because they know this is crazy, because they see their parents profiting on the guns and the rockets and people making this stuff, and they see this earth collapsing under all of our possessions. If you do not heed the call, and the call, what is the basic call we have, is to care for our sister and our brother, right? To love one another. If we can't heed that call, it will come back to us in symptoms. It will come back to us in addiction and depression and all kinds of stuff, right? Which is one reason the lesson this morning is so gorgeous and lovely and beautiful. Because even though it's like one of the first scriptures we learned as a little child, I'm going to make you fish for people, and fish, and James and John and Peter, Andrew. The focus on this scripture is not on those guys. It is on Jesus. Those guys don't do a damn thing, especially in Mark's gospel. It is 16 verses into it. They are just standing there, and Jesus walks by, and they are not special or committed or, they're just nothing. They just see him, and somehow seeing him, they go. And the emphasis in this scripture is on Jesus seeing them. In Mark's gospel, Jesus is the one who sees us. Jesus sees the disciples. Jesus sees Levi. Jesus sees the crowd pressing in on him. Jesus sees us. This is Elijah walking by and tapping Elisha. This is Jody calling Ann. This is Teach for America calling Ben and Shelley. Think about it. What if when you went out on your morning run or on your walk, you had this sense that somewhere there is this creator, there is this divine presence that is gazing at you always, like looking at you and what you can give and calling you out. Just like eyes on you. It reminds me of the band director who sees the lonely little girl in the lunchroom who is with her spoons tapping on the desk and says, you could be a drummer in the band, right? Or it is the youth worker who sees the kid on the street dealing drugs and goes out there and says, do you want to be in the Kaufman Entrepreneur Program? Do you see? It's this gazing, and it's this seeing, and it's this calling one another into life. Howard Thurman started off as a fisherman, started off as just a little bitty boy fishing. Howard Thurman was born in 1899 in Daytona Beach, Florida, grandson of slaves. His father died when he was 7 of pneumonia, which left him to be raised by grandmother Nancy, who had been a slave, and his mother. The conditions there were not much different than the plantation in North Florida that grandmother had grown up on. But the grandmother and mother, who were people of deep faith, were absolutely convinced that Howard would have the best education he could. He was the first black kid to finish 8th grade in Daytona, even though he was working full-time fishing and working at the fish market. He had such this intuitive sense of fish and the rivers and the ocean and life that, I mean, he could just sense where the fish, he knew their patterns. He could take orders on Monday for what fish people wanted on Tuesday night for dinner, and he could deliver it. And when he finished 8th grade, first one, there were only 3 high schools in Florida where black kids could go. Jacksonville was one of them. Buck O'Neill went there. A lot of famous black people ended up in Jacksonville, ended up in these few places where you could go to high school. Just getting to Jacksonville, some of you know the story, trying to get the money, to get the train ticket, to get his baggage, to get there, and then trying to feed himself. He was cold and hungry a lot of the times in high school, but he still was valedictorian. Then he went to Morehouse College, where he was also valedictorian, where supposedly, famously, he read every single book in the library. But he still had this call. His call was to ministry. His call, as he said, was to reach out to the desperate needs of my people. So then he went up to Rochester, New York, and became one of the first black folks to finish there, again, valedictorian. He was such a deep, rich spirit and soul that in 1935, Howard Thurman led a group of African Americans for 6 months to India, where they worked with Gandhi and learned all about the techniques of nonviolence. And then he came back, he had this huge, expansive sense of faith that included Buddhism and Hindu and Jew and Christian and all this. And in 1944, he went to San Francisco, where he started the very first interfaith, interracial church in this country called All Peoples. And he is known, if you know his name, it's probably because he's considered to be the mentor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many of the other civil rights leaders, like Polly Murray and some of the women as well. And he's known for his 15 books. His writing is just the kind of beautiful language that just drips. And so much of his writing was about the call, that we have. You may know his quote, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and do it, because that's what the world needs. The world needs people who are fully alive." And then he wrote that kind of beautiful commencement speech at Spelman in 1980, just before he died, talking about the sound of the genuine. He believed that in every single person there was the sound of the genuine. And our life's goal was to listen and to hear that. And if we didn't hear it, we would spend our life searching. If we didn't hear it, we would spend our life being pulled along by the strings of other people. But our call was also to listen to the sound of the genuine in other, because every person had the sound of the genuine in them. And he said, if I listen to the sound of the genuine in me and you listen to the sound of the genuine in you, it's possible for me to go down in me and come back up in you, and everything that divides us will fall apart, because the sound of the genuine makes the same music. And he had this sense that we are all called as God's people to see our gifts and to see others. And one of the things I appreciate most about Thurman's work is how he speaks to all of us. He says the call, it can come to us through our neighbor, but also through nature. It comes to us in community, but also in solitude. So writing about the neighbor, he knew he heard this call through his mother and his grandmother and through all those teachers and through the people who helped him make it to Jacksonville and all those people who supported him. But he also heard the call of God in the world around him, and his writings about the river and the ocean. But he also talked about this old oak tree that he would go sit in his yard, and he would put his back against that oak tree, and he would feel this connection, and he would pull out his burdens and his joys, and he would unfold them. And with his back against that old oak tree, he felt the incredible presence of God. Epiphany is this season when we take out what we don't look at very often and see what we are called to, and we name it as holy. That's what I do every morning on the run, no matter what the temperature is. It doesn't matter, because the point is to be outside, to put my feet on the earth, to see the birds, to feel the cold or the heat on my skin, and to feel alive. But it's also to be in the neighborhood. That is what worship is for me, right? This time when we get together, when we are called. It's the same thing with Cherith Brook. It's being there, it's feeling called. It's the same thing with this kind of now far-flung community I've discovered of people working for an end to this war. Friday, I was on a webinar with 500 people at the start, 500 people an hour and a half later, listening to Peter Beinart, one of the best Jewish scholars that the rabbi quoted a few weeks ago, along with Rashid Halidi, who teaches at Columbia, who is one of the Palestinian scholars. And it was for an hour and 50, like trying to drink from a water hydrant. There was just so much coming out, so powerful and so moving and so heartbreaking. And to understand the situation is to realize how desperate it is, because it's not just the Israelis and the Americans, it's the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Jordanians and all these people just pushing down against the Palestinians. And the last 15 minutes, as Peter Beinart thanked Rashid for how hopeful he still felt, how hopeful because people are paying attention. And I just wept. I just wept for 15 minutes. And then when it was over, Joe's up there working in the law office, and I yelled up the stairs crying, maybe I should go work for the United Nations, work with refugees, be a part of this. Of course, there's a million people better suited for that, and there's so many people there already. And yet, what a gift, right? To feel called. That is a gift, right? When you feel stirred, when you feel moved, when you feel like there's something I can do. Maybe I can work with the refugee here at Peace Church. Maybe I can be a better mom. Maybe I can be a better partner. Maybe I can be kinder to the person at the grocery store. We are called folks, right? And Epiphany is that time of the year to take that out and to look at it. Don't ask what the world needs, damn it, right? Ask what makes you come alive and do it, because that's what the world needs, people who are fully alive. Amen.